It all started at the end of my life. Literally. Well, how can I not? Lying across the bed in front of me was me. Bandages were wrapped around my head and arms. Most of my bones appeared to be broken. Machines made endless beeping noises that broke the silence, and much to my surprise.
What's happening?
Do I have a twin brother that my parents never told me about? Or maybe I had mental issues all along. And these are all signs? I hear that hallucination is a symptom for brain damage too.
It was when it dawned on me, like a character in a movie. The last thing I remembered before waking up in here. How stupid me! Of course, it explained the causes of my injuries. It was a completely normal day for me, which is a questionable time for a disaster to come and strike. I was just crossing the street, and on the pedestrian line too.
Great. My dad now?
I said, more annoyed than terrified, while scratching the back of my head. It was just like a pathetic way to die. Too pathetic that I'd rather mistake Lorraine for wine and drink the whole bottle. Now, I'd be the one of the many casualties in traffic accidents that no one would even care about.
The corridor was devoid of nurses pushing carts, doctors doing rounds, and patients loitering around. Not only the corridor was empty though, but also to every room that I checked as well, except for one. A woman who looked like in her late 60s, laid down, moving. I thought she was dead, like me, but as I got closer to her, I realized that her eyes were open. When she realized that she had company, she turned her head towards my direction. Her whitish black hair rustled under her pillow, and her lips and lids quivered, giving away how weak she was at this point. She looked at me with curious eyes, and I could almost tell what she was asking me.
I'm sorry for barging in. I'm the patient next door. Nice to meet you.
Guess I won't be getting any response, and it made the atmosphere a little bit awkward. And by a little, I mean a lot. I asked her about many things, like why she was here, where are her relatives, or why she wouldn't answer me, but she won't budge. So I figured that she's mad at me for trespassing, or that she's hinting me to just shut up and go away. I looked over my shoulder, bumping into the doorway frame as I did, and saw the old lady's eyes filled with unanswered questions hasn't left him. If there's one thing I should be grateful about, it'd be the fact that I wasn't out for too long after the accident. I mean, sort of. I don't want to miss the Christmas season. I hate the cold, but I love snuggling up in the comforts of my old blanket and enjoy a warm cup of coffee in front of the fireplace during the winter. I know it sounds old even though I'm still in my late 20s.
Lying in the cold hospital sofa made me think twice about loving winter. It made me feel alone and forgotten, and the fact that I didn't see anyone visit me didn't help at all. The moon shone through the curtains, filling in the light that the sun radiated during the day. I always thought that it was enchanting from the time I realized that it followed me around. When I rode a car, drove a bike, and even walked through the night, it stayed close like a faraway companion. The moon? How I wish I could just pull it down and stare at its splendor, while it lulled me down to sleep. Maybe it could take away this nightmare and these horrible thoughts that comes with it. What if I don't survive? What if I've been forgotten and thrown away by my family? Could that be the reason why they hadn't visited me? My mind was clouded with questions that I couldn't answer. Curious like the eyes of the old lady that stared me down the hallway. And before I knew it, my eyes wandered down and my body succumbed to the abyss of a dreamless sleep.
The room was filled with an unmistakable aroma of home-baked mac and cheese. The container sat idly on the bedside table, warm and moist like I always requested when my mom cooked, but I didn't see her come by, nor did I see anyone enter at all. The smell of cheese flooded my lungs as I inhaled before digging in. I never get hungry, but one would never get used to not eating, especially at the sight of food. Unsurprisingly, the hospital was silent this morning. I never got to wander around, so I figured that maybe I can take a quick stroll around the establishment. Looking back, I never really get to visit hospitals often. My thoughts got interrupted as I strolled down the hall and caught a glimpse of the old lady beside my room. She's still in bed, sitting upright as she held what seems to be a pen and paper in her hands. Her eyes darted to the door as she noticed me, which made me avert my eyes, slightly embarrassed for peeking. When I was about to take a step, a clap echoed through the endless silence, making me look back to the lady who has her palms together up in the air. Not that I'm assuming, but I guess she's trying to grab my attention for some reason. And so I slowly approached her on her bed.
Good morning, ma'am.
I tried greeting her, but her attention was fixated on the paper, which I now noticed was a sketchpad up close. She started scribbling in a sluggish manner which left me awkwardly standing beside her. What if she didn't mean to call me, and I just entered her room uninvited again?
I flinched when she touched my hand, or at least she tried to, but her hands went past through mine like touching hot steam. My body froze for a moment. It was like I was still processing if everything was real or merely a dream, but that simple action had already solidified my worries. No, I wasn't the type of person that would cry about little things, so I smiled and raised my head to face her. She too wore a small smile with her thin lips as she held up her pad to my face. Written in blank ink with a marker in her hands were the words. It explained everything, and I feel super dumb not to realize it sooner. All those hands, gestures, and expressions she made were telling me this since yesterday. It's just then that I noticed the hearing aid she's wearing on her right ear too. I stuttered.
I'm
as
sorry.
she touched the back of my hand, feeling
Can you hear
down.
me? Right now?
She slightly nodded her head and grabbed her marker again. I looked at her with disbelief. How did she know? Was she the one who sent it after all? But why?
You sent that? For me?
I asked her, but she shook her head and let out a soft giggle. She wrote, "Apparently, she saw my mom carry the food to my room. I had quite a few visitors from time to time, and she told me that I likely missed them. She probably didn't know how relieved I was hearing that."
So, tell me about yourself.
I told her when I came by again to her room the next day. She looked around as if she's thinking on what to say or write in her case.
Maybe you could tell me about your family. Like, who's your husband and what does he do?
I suggested after a minute of silence.
Oh,
I reacted, not nearly shocked, but I panicked a bit as I scrambled to think of another question to ask.
then perhaps you had children?
I cautiously asked, making her tilt her head a little.
You know, giving birth and the like. Okay, that's enough about your family then. You want to hear mine?
I asked hurriedly, trying to change the topic even though she doesn't seem fazed at all. She wrote,
Weeks passed by and I had not seen anyone but Linda. Mom would leave out food for me from time to time, but I always wondered why I couldn't see her come, like she was avoiding me somehow. Linda about it, and she said she do see my mom come by sometimes. She did admit to knowing quite a few people in class about others, and so I couldn't ask more.
I need to ask you something.
My eyes fixated on Linda as I spoke, and she raised a brow at me as a sign to ask on. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a slight dramatic impact.
Do you happen to know someone good enough for me to date?
My eyes sparkled, but she just rolled hers, completely not tolerating my childlike personality. No fair.
But I don't want to die in virgin.
I whined on, just goofing around. I never really dated before, but it wouldn't be a loss for me if I couldn't experience it. I used to be a goal-oriented person, and I have no regrets. It's not like I'm going to die soon anyways. Couldn't be that weak. I felt Linda lightly tapping my shoulder to get my attention. She held up the pad in front of me like she always does. I snickered, amused that she rode onto my jokes, which she barely did.
And who would that be?
I asked, but she just shrugged her shoulders whenever I tried asking. It felt like ages.
I somehow wish that I wake up one day and I'd be back on my body. The monitors on my room would remain constant, and the beeping noises wouldn't make much sense to me. I felt sick every time I'd wake up on the hard sofa, and I feel even lonelier when I sleep not knowing if I'll ever see the light of day again. Would it be possible I'd never see her once I wake up? That's one of the things I always got on my mind on. What if we were able to communicate because we are nearing death's doorstep? Thinking about them made me lonelier. We shared some sort of connection that I grew fond of. Trust the timing of your life was the last thing I remember that Linda wrote. True enough, her history was full of devastation and tragedy. She didn't let her tragic past stop her. She was saved by the thought that only she can make the best of what she had. With the help of her friends, she was able to get back to her feet and continue her journey. Being a baker wasn't all her dream, but given their current situation, She could do nothing but inherit the business that had been passed down to them for generations. Kneading dough was a tiresome task. Maybe that explains why she can still work despite of worsening conditions. That makes me admire her even more.
Knowing how she spent her younger years, I can truly say that she deserves the white crown of wisdom she wears on her head, and taking her feels like sharing the crown for a moment. The way she smiles and how she gently writes on the paper shows me how truly happy and young she was. After the laughter we had shared, there were silence between us that unexplainable. It was crossing a bridge from a fairy tale dreamland to a nightmare-filled one. A calm before the storm, some might say, and maybe the nightmare will be said, we will part ways. I remember how the sun suddenly warmed up, got us both a cup and a coffee.
Linda?
Her skin was snow fluttering in the sleeping sunlight. It was almost as if time was seeing from her, bringing back the youth she once had, and for once I saw the look of contentment and peace in her eyes.
What's happening?
I asked, but she didn't have the time to answer my endless question like she used to. She shared her warmth with me with a small smile. Before I knew it, she faded away like a glow in a spectacular sunset at the beach. I was left behind, awestruck and dazed, not sure what should I even feel. It was this time that I realized I was alone. Linda was the only one accompanying me all this time, since I ended up stuck in here. She listened to everything I shared about, and she never failed to be patient in satisfying my curiosity. But now, she had left me with nothing at all, or so I thought. The sheet on her bed remained crumpled, and the blanket is shifted to one side, almost as if Linda had just gone to the bathroom and would be back any minute now. But my mind knew better than be a prey of this illusion. She's gone, leaving me without but a word sprawled out in the last empty page of her sketchpad. I didn't understand, but I have a feeling that I soon will. I had this foreign feeling in my stomach when I read it.
This last word.
I silently thought to myself, the winds are now blowing softly outside, almost as if the sun hid and the snow began to play. Still, I wanted to get out of here somehow. I don't mind the cold, no, not at all.
A walk on the park.
I silently mumbled, thinking of ways to clear my mind.
Be a great idea.
What do I want so bad in my life? Well, it changes often, but it would be nice to get some fresh air and step in a new environment once in a while. A meadow, maybe.
Dr. Mendoza?
My secretary Pip in the office, still dressed in his winter coat and boots with a clipboard rested in his probably frost-bitten hands. Once, this was only a dream. How nice would it be to be called a doctor and place it MD after your name, as if it was unreachable. I did call my way up to this lavish life.
Yes?
I politely asked, smoothing out my gown and studying my glasses in case a client is waiting.
Has someone arrived already?
He nodded in response and looked back down his clipboard, probably scrolling back to today's schedule.
He's an hour early.
He stepped back towards the doorway and looked across the hall.
As always.
Mr. Galvez? I'm not surprised.
I began to stand and walk towards the receiving area to greet him. Mr. Chris Galvez, 25 years old, and from a filthy rich family of jewelry makers, yet he never failed to be humble, showing up wearing a tropical blue long-sleeved turtleneck top that stuck in neatly in his dark jeans. His hat and coat sat idly by the rack with a few spots of melting snow. He smiled when he saw me walking towards him, and he carefully stood up to meet me.
Chris was one stranger that you'd least expect to be in my clinic. I'll give him that. He has that twinkling smile, he works hard to the core, and he tries to be the best man that he could be. But life and perfect are things that would never shake hands on something for any reason.
So, how's your week, Chris?
A question I ask to every single patient. Broad, but it's a way to make them tell the main dish in their week.
He's not getting any better.
He rasped, combing his finger through his hair and trying to pull himself together. This man, however, would trade anything for a peaceful life with his family. I had never come to ask him about his career or romantic relationships. He never even bothered to tell me about himself at all if I hadn't initiated. He'd always talk about his family.
You won't believe how my parents get to know each other.
He told me, all giddy up on his first day of consultation.
Oh, so tell me about it.
My dad thinks my mom was a broke teenager. Had cold security and my mom when she refused to leave the shop. So my mom bought a 5-carat diamond ring and made him keep the change.
Younger siblings are truly the sweetest as I see in him. He'd talk about his parents and older brother for hours that we have to allot him 5 hours in schedule per week.
My older brother loves school more than I do. He's a book for it.
He exclaimed, now that we're on his 3rd session.
I bet he's top in their class when he graduated.
I said, thinking if I'd ask him about his academic standing too.
He actually is. But I sort of hate him for tricking me into getting this tattooed in my wrist. It doesn't make sense, doesn't it?
His life was perfect. Too perfect that it made me envious. Until his whole family fought off a difficult decision to make while they had an ongoing case in court. It all got even worse when Chris' brother got run down by a truck a day before he first went to my clinic. And I could only imagine how distressing it was for them when they began to realize that no amount of money can instantly make their son wake up from his deep sleep. God knows how many people had broken down in front of me in this office, but this young lad just wouldn't shed a single tear.
Oh, hon, I'm sure he'll be up before...
The doctor says he won't make it.
He said in a shaky and raspy voice that almost cracked with every word.
It's too painful to watch him with all those wires. But it's the only thing that's keeping him alive.
For the past weeks, he's not getting any better. In fact, he's getting worse and worse. He admitted to his increase of alcohol intakes and even considered smoking and going to casinos. I have to do something about it. Talk some sense into him maybe, even if all this work makes my head throb every now and then. Even sleep is a luxury when you get into this point in life.
Doctor?
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say again?
I know someone else who needed to see a psychiatrist more than I do.
Well, good. I'm in dire need of patients. Who would they be?
You.
I wasn't expecting him to notice, and I didn't know what gave it away. But as I glanced at the small pink mirror on my desk, I think I might have an idea. Dark circles tugged down my eyes behind my glasses, and my hair was back in its messy bird's nest shape, completely ignoring the effort I've put into combing this morning.
I saw your mom in the emergency room yesterday, and I figured that we both needed someone to talk to today.
He looked at me with weary eyes.
It was a cold winter evening, as I recalled. I couldn't remember what the doctor on the phone had exactly said, but I understood him even before I answered the call. I remembered how that small pain in my head decided to burn itself down through my skull at that exact moment, before my mind tore away from reality and succumbed myself into the darkness. A cold day indeed for Mom to decide to finally part with us. I woke up to the plain old white ceiling of my clinic's patient's bed, still dressed in my white gown and glasses. My fingers were stinging from frostbite that made me rub my hands together for some heat that was never too enough. I carefully sat up and made my way into my desk to find myself some hot packs. The pain in my head has subsided completely at this point, as if though I hadn't felt that at all. I've thought about what happened earlier about my mom, but I also knew that I can act better, tougher, because I've managed to make a new life for others that had come upon this situation. Now, I should make a new life for my own.
Done?
I called out to my secretary when I found the counter and the receiving area empty. He never left without asking permission from me.
Jeez, how long was I out?
I scratched the back of my head and removed my gown and fetched my purse to head out to see my mom and call it a day, since no patients were in sight either. And I don't think I'm also in the right condition to entertain them. I put on my coat, gloves, and my scarf, and looked out the window to see the weather. Snow was still pouring out, but I didn't bring any hat. As soon as I opened the door, the wind blew cold winter air to my cheeks, and I could feel my nose turning red. But it wasn't that disturbed me in any way.
It was awfully quiet. No honking cars, no Christmas bells, no busy streets. There's certainly no person inside at all. For a minute, I stood there, frozen like the snow beneath my feet, and trying to wake myself up from this dazing, vivid dream. But it was of no use, and I did the thing that I practiced all my life to overcome: panic. I dropped my bags and ran across the empty streets. My clothes were heavy, and the only sounds I can hear are my rapid footsteps in the neat pavement and my unsteady, deep breaths. I opened the door to every shop: bakeries, toy stores, coffee shops, and I even strolled the malls, but still no person was in sight. I found myself in a park, not a place to go in winter, but I stood in there, closed my eyes, and relaxed myself in this crazy situation. The wind blew colder, and my face grew number each second that passes by. It was peaceful, yet it wasn't. It was quiet, yet my heart was screaming.
Now what?
I stupidly asked myself as I opened my eyes. My breathing hitched as my gaze met this strange man with eyes as shocked as mine. He was wearing this black jeans and crimson red button-down shirt under his plain black coat. His hands were tucked inside his pocket, and he seemed unbothered by the growing cold. I saw him start to move and cut the distance between us without breaking his stare, although his daze had already subsided. I was acting like I've never seen a single person before, and I felt like a bone-headed woman, lost in a trance. I look around, hopeful that I've come to my senses, but we were still alone in this motionless world.
Are you lost?
He cocked his head to the side a little, inspecting me with a grin plastered on his face.
Who are you, and where am I, and why are...
Too many questions.
He amusingly said, and he lightly tapped me on my shoulders.
You need to calm down to think straight, okay?
I know that.
I want to tell him I'm a licensed psychiatrist for almost 5 years.
Well, then act like it.
Did this guy just read my mind?
Look, I don't know who you are nor what is happening, but I'd appreciate it if you respect my privacy. Mind reading freak.
I blurted out, not even sure what I was getting upset about. He looked at me for a second before he started to walk away.
This girl. Stay quiet for a person with noisy thoughts.
And with that, he disappeared into the cold winter night. My house is too far away for me to walk, and the blizzard outside made it impossible for me to even drive a car. And so, I decided to gather some wood and start a fire in my clinic's fireplace. The power is out, unsurprisingly, so I only have the fire as my light source. My phone was also almost down, but it didn't matter since I don't think I'd be needing it. How long would I be stuck in this void? I'm too scared to even think about that. If I stay stuck in here, I won't be able to see my mom for the last time. I won't be able to help my patients, and I will die alone and discontented. Well, it sucks to be me.
It's in the middle of the night, for heaven's sakes. But I already know who was knocking, and before he can even say a thing, I invited him in for a cup of tea. He looked like he was still in his late 20s, with a happy-go-lucky personality, judging from the grins and snorts he'd been giving me since we met at the park.
Seemed lonely.
He replied without lifting his gaze away from the book he's reading when I asked him the reason why he came over. I didn't flinch nor argue, because a part of me knows that he's right. Even for a psych like me, this is too much.
Wanna see me do a trick?
So, you're a magician now?
I feel back at him, amused by his little efforts to lighten the mood. This guy might not be as bad as I thought after all. Like the usual tricks, he made me pick a random card from the deck. The card I had was the Queen of Hearts, and he told me not to show him, but I must remember the card. After a few stunts and card flips, then after he bumped his head on the table, he showed me the card I picked.
Queen of Hearts for my queen.
We laughed and snorted as he made a few more card tricks that wasn't at all successful. The clinic was a mess and the fire is almost out, but who cares? I admit, I can't remember the last time I had fun as close to this. Adulthood is such a pain, and I figured that maybe this was the break that I needed. Away from all the problems and away from the things that hurt.
So, how long have you been in here?
I finally managed to ask him.
A few days, weeks. Can't remember exactly. Time's a bit messed up in here.
He answered as he castled his king on the board.
Chess wasn't really my forte, but he begged me to play with him when he found the board locked up behind the counter. I didn't even know with the chessboard in here.
You like shopping malls?
He randomly asked me, knocking my king piece off the board with his bishop.
That depends if I have the time and money to shop.
I lazily said after being checkmated in the game. He grabbed my hand by surprise and pulled me up to my feet.
Let's go to the mall then.
Are you nuts? It's freezing and it's in the middle of the night.
I looked at him, all weirded out and still bothered that he was still gripping my hand.
Not anymore.
He chimed and pointed out the glass window that revealed the calm winter breeze, and with that, I let him pull me outside into the night. I remember going here when I was frantically searching up the whole city for any sign of people. But I didn't think much of it because at that time, this was an empty and eerily silent place to be in.
Do you want some?
He offered me his half-bitten donut that he got from the Krispy Kreme stand in the corner, and I sneered at the sight of his face caked with chocolate. Everything in here seemed untouched, like it was frozen in time. Breads were hot, and stores are lighting up in their usual spots. After eating at a restaurant I suggested, he asked to go for a shopping, which is weird since I've never met a guy who is up to shop for clothes.
If it's free, then why not?
He said while taking a sip of a drink that he snatched up who knows where. Unbelievable.
But that would be stealing.
I retorted, but we ended up leaving the mall, shopping bags in hand, and living the best out of our lives. Through the days, he took me places that I've never been before in this big city. Casinos, lakes, tree houses, and we even went to snowboarding, and I didn't even know how to snowboard. My favorite, however, is an amusement park. We had all the rides to ourselves, and the food stalls were still swarming with cotton candies and waffles. I'm not sure how the power works, but I didn't have the time to care about the technicalities. All I know is that I'm going to have fun.
Look! Here's a bunny on one of the carousel horses.
I rolled my eyes at him with a smirk and turned to look out the window of the Ferris wheel. The whole city is visible from up here, and the lights were mesmerizing under the dark skies. I once heard that a ride in the Ferris wheel at night is magical.
Well, they're absolutely right.
I thought as I glanced down the little furry bunny that he was making a fuss about. It was as if I was given the chance to live the life I never would have imagined I could. I can do anything with the expense of nothing, and I've come to trust and find comfort in someone like I never did before. I didn't know why he was doing all of this, but every time I look at him, I smile for uncertain reasons. He certainly radiates positivity wherever he goes. He called me once while we were lying on our backs in the middle of a wide meadow. Stars were twinkling in their brightest colors, compensating for the light that the moon had failed to give us that night.
What's been bothering you?
He asked. A broad question. Indeed, broad enough to bring out the main dish in my life. I was adopted. Never in my life had I met my biological parents, and I was left crying in a basket in front of my mother's old local bakery. She was a widow, undeprived of the blessing to give birth to a child. And so, when she heard me cry outside the doorstep and glanced at the infant, abandoned and unloved, we were like a lac-a-decay that matched. She wasn't fortunate in terms of financial status, but she was rich with love that nurtured me to become a fine woman. I worked and scrapped hard with her just so I can reach this career, my dream job. But just when I thought everything was going well, she got sick. For 3 years, she fought. But after 3 years, she left me. For good. I could barely pay the rent for the clinic. I could even barely eat nor sleep each day, trying to scrape some patience that sometimes it made me wonder if there are less problematic people than I thought. All the while I was talking, I knew he'd been watching me, following the movement of my hands and observing how my expression shifted from one to another. Something heavy was up in my chest, like a boulder that's making my breaths hitched. I didn't move or make any sound, but I felt him pull me over and wrapped his arms around me while we laid down in snow-sprinkled grass. Before I knew it, tears started to roll down my cheeks like a river that's been blocked for years. He was gentle as I feel him rub my back ever so lightly to make me feel better. It was addicting. Discomfort that I never knew I needed it until he broke my barriers and made me feel vulnerable again. She's gone, man. I kept sobbing with my face buried in his chest. She's gone. He whispered words of comfort into my ears, light and gentle like his touches. I felt him plant a soft kiss in my forehead, and I fell asleep in the comfort of his arms in this moonless night.
I woke up in the cold grass. The sun glowed right above, kissing the earth with its warmth. The birds in the nearby trees started to welcome the morning with melodic chirps. Max is gone beside me, so I figured maybe he took a stroll down the hill or chased some wild chipmunks through some woods. But when hours had passed by without any signs of him, I decided to head back, worried to my stomach. Where did he run off to? Did he get lost? But it is impossible for him to get lost. I'd see him maneuver around and he knew the city like the back of his hand. The clinic was as empty as I left it. Shopping bags were sitting on top of the counter, and chess pieces were scattered on the floor. If he's not here, then where could he be? And why did he run off without me? Without another thought, I rushed out and started the engine of the nearest car that could grab hold of. Like I was back at the time when I was scared and alone. I frantically searched through the rows of shops in the mall, but it was back to it seriously. No Max in sight. I drove through the frozen lakes, the park, the casinos, his favorite forest sites, and even the amusement park. It was all empty, and I'm once again left alone in this damn place. I breathed heavily, like stones were dragging down my lungs, but I wasn't certain if it was because I was tired from all that running or because I was trying to stop a sob. Either way, I'm really exhausted, but I finally made up my mind to visit the place I feared the most. The walls were painted white, and the air was as cold as it is outside, just like any other hospitals in the city. But in this hospital, I've already memorized the halls and corridors and even spots with the strongest signal connections. I remembered rushing through the doors of this building when my mom had collapsed on the floor one morning. Nurses and doctors had swarmed her, connecting wires and machines that I wish I knew how to operate. I promised to take care of her, but she passed away before I can even pay her back for everything she's done for me. My feet froze beside the door of a familiar room. A room I'd been visiting for 3 years. A room that's once filled with laughter and cries of agonies. The basket of fruits I left for her for that week sat idly beside the tabletop untouched. She said that it's better to give it to someone else, and that she wanted me to cook something for her instead. I wish that he cooked for her soon.
How I wish.
I whispered to myself as I exited the room, with Max waiting out the doorway, sitting on the line of hospital chairs in the hall. I quietly sat beside him. He didn't look up while he was reading a piece of paper, and probably he already knew I was coming here sooner or later.
How do you feel?
He asked me in a monotonous voice.
I'm not sure.
I said as he enveloped my cold hand with the warmth of his, and that made me more confused.
I thought you left me.
My voice cracked, and I couldn't hide the pain in my voice as I felt him grip my hand tighter.
Yes.
He looked up at me, and I understood him the moment we locked eyes.
Maybe I am living. We're good.
I didn't notice it a while ago, but when I looked at him this time, I realized he was fading away. Suddenly, the hand he's holding feels a bit colder every second, like his warmth was slowly fading, and I was utmost terrified. He stood up, and I immediately wrapped my arms around his waist and buried my face in his chest.
Take me with you.
My cries were muffled, but I know they were clear enough for him to understand. I sound like a kid. I sound too selfish. But at this moment, it's all I want, to be with him. He pulled away from my embrace and cupped my face in his hands while looking straight into my eyes. And I cried harder when I saw him glittering around the ray of sunshine that the windows had allowed to slip through.
I need goodbyes.
He said while wiping my endless stream of tears.
But I'll tell you that. You were my moon in the moonless night.
The hallway glowed with an intensely blinding light from his fading body, and I held his arms tighter and not wanting to let go. He smiled and held my hand over his wrist.
Wanted to be a sight too, just like you.
The light was too much and my strained eyes, and I didn't understand. But I continued to sob and hold on to him until I felt his wrist slip away from his grasp. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I looked at him and he gave me one last smile. Tattooed in black ink on his right wrist were the words, "To infinity."
I love you, my moon.
And with that, he disappeared into the shimmering light.
I woke up with a start. The plain white ceiling of the clinic innocently greeted me like nothing had ever happened. I was still dressed in my gown, and my glasses sat on top of the bedside table. Even my shoes weren't removed, leaving stains on the white covers of the clinic's patient's bed.
Doc, you're awake. Thank goodness, you were worried.
My secretary exclaimed, and he helped me get up from the clinic bed. Was that all a dream? How could it be?
How long was I out?
I asked immediately. Unlike before, I still feel a bit lightheaded after I woke up.
You blacked out in your desk 10 minutes ago. Doc, is everything alright?
Dan asked. That's impossible, isn't it? How can I have that vivid dream in 10 minutes? I know what I felt in those moments. It was real. I don't even know if I should be happy that I'm back in this reality. This is what I want, right? It should be.
Yes, Dad. I'll be over there in a minute.
A voice echoed in the hallway, just outside the room. I looked up and saw Chris entering with his phone held up in his ear. I can't read his expression, nor what he's thinking when he looked at me and smiled. A daringly familiar smile. He reached over his pocket and took something out. A paper, maybe.
He didn't make it. My brother.
He said and handed me the paper, turned away, and disappeared towards the door. He didn't even let me speak first before he left. I was his psychiatrist for a reason after all. But it didn't let me bug me further as I turned my attention to the paper he gave me. Only it wasn't a paper. My heart started to race and my vision blurred with a pool of unshed tears. My hands were trembling, not because of the cold, but because the pain I feel was too much to handle. What do I want so bad in life? Not much, but it would be a long and happy life. And receiving this Queen of Hearts card written with, I made it, instead of, I'm sorry, all over it. Move on, I always say to my patients. But it was the easiest and most obvious thing to do. I guess the Queen would continue to live on, but without the King. I doubt her world would ever spin again.